Well, good morning and welcome to Quest. My name is Jessica Bolliard. I'm part of our speaking team here at Quest, and I am so glad that you're here with us today as we move forward in our summer series. Summer is starting to wind down now, so you may have some mixed emotions on that. I know I do, but we still have some time left, and so we're going to embrace what we've got. One of the things that I've been doing with my family this summer has been watching America's Got Talent, AGT. Anybody else? Please? Some of you are not admitting it. I know. I love this show, and this is the first year that we've kind of let my daughter watch it with us, and we watch it over and over and over again, the same episodes over and over. And by this point, we have clear favorites. We have clear not favorites. We have some that we know we need to mute the TV. We have some we know we need to skip ahead of, and we have some that we know we need to leave the room altogether because that's not happening. But we love, more than anything, watching the backstories of some of the contestants. We love seeing what brought them to this point in their lives, where they're standing on a stage in the bright lights with these 4 critical judges and millions of people watching them. How did they get there? What is their dream? We love seeing that. And, sometimes it goes really well for them. The judges say, yes, we loved it, you're on to the next round. Sometimes there's some debate about that. Sometimes they get the big red X and get sent home. But my favorite is when one of the contestants captures the heart of one of the judges and they give them the coveted golden buzzer. Now, the golden buzzer is basically a free pass to one of the later rounds in the competition. They get to skip through a lot of the eliminations. And that, to me, is such an affirmation of that contestant's hard work, of the risk that they've taken to stand up there and do whatever it is that they've done. All the hard work, all the jitters, all the self-doubt, whatever it took for them to get there is worth it. In that one magical moment when they are approved. Yes, that was a good job. And I cry nearly every single time I see that. Even when I watch it over again, I know it's about to happen and I still cry. Because I know these contestants go realizing that this could soar them off into a brand new career, or it could crash their dreams to the ground. And then they see the best case scenario come, and it really is magic for them. I can't imagine what that feels like for them, but I do think that we all know a little bit about how it feels to take a risk, to kind of put ourselves out there vulnerably and do something. Now, most of us probably will never stand on a stage in front of thousands or millions of people in the bright lights with Simon Cowell staring at us, but we all take risks. We all do things every day that are a little bit hard, make us feel a little bit vulnerable. Maybe you are applying for a job that you really want, but to be honest, you're not sure you qualify for. Maybe you're approaching someone that you know that you've hurt and you've been avoiding them, but you're going to approach them and ask for forgiveness. Maybe you're continuing to pursue and fight for a relationship that honestly looks like it's dying. Maybe you're making a financial investment that could go either way. Maybe you're leaving a job without really knowing where you're going next. We all take these risks and we do these things that may or may not pay off. We just don't know. But we all know that vulnerability. We all know that feeling of fear, but of kind of feeling like we have to do it anyway. And we're going to look at that today from Jesus' perspective as we continue in our Summer Short Stories series. We've been looking at different parables that Jesus told throughout the course of his ministry, and today we're going to look at one that he told sort of near the end of his ministry. Before we go any further, what is a parable? A parable is a story that's told to illustrate a greater point, something bigger. And I really liked Bob Holler's definition that he used last week. He said that a parable is a story that uses what we know to describe or explain something we cannot or do not know. And Jesus is a master at this kind of teaching. He sees the teachable moments, and he embraces those to teach his followers and the people around him about the kingdom of heaven. So that's what these parables do. And today we're looking at a parable that Jesus told to a crowd around him when they were on their way to Jerusalem. Now, Jesus knew that in Jerusalem he was going to be put on trial. He was going to be crucified. He knew that was what's about to happen. But his followers are assuming that he's going to ascend to a throne, that they're going to get to see this revolution and the king take over. Jesus' enemies, on the other hand, are looking for times and any opportunity they can to condemn him. So they're on their way to Jerusalem, and they stop at the home of a man named Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus is a tax collector, which automatically makes him public enemy number one. They do not like Zacchaeus. And Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and says, "Hey, go get your other tax collector friends. Bring them here. I want to see them." So Jesus is in this house full of really the wealthiest people in this culture. And that's when he tells this story. And I want us to keep in mind who he's talking to when he tells the story. These are wealthy men in their culture. The parable we're looking at is in both the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, but we're going to stay kind of planted in Matthew chapter 25 today. It says, "At that time, God's kingdom will also be like a man leaving home to travel to another place for a visit. Before he left, he talked with his servants. He told his servants to take care of his things while he was gone. He decided how much each servant would be able to care for. The man gave one servant 5 talents. He gave another servant 2 talents, and he gave a third servant 1 talent. Then he left." Now, if you're a church person, you've been here for a little while, you probably have heard this parable told as the parable of the talents. It makes sense, and it's a good title. But it can be a little bit confusing, because the thing is, a talent in this day, when Jesus was talking, is not the same as a talent we think of it today. It has to be translated from the Greek, and our word for talent actually comes from the Greek word that Jesus used. So it kind of gets a little bit confusing. So what's a talent to us? It's that special ability that somebody has to do something. It's that thing that you might go onto this huge stage and try and do in front of millions of people in order to win $1 million. That is a talent to us. But the men gathered around Jesus would have heard something completely different when Jesus said talents. They would have heard money. Because a talent in that day was a unit of measurement specifically for money. So Jesus knew that these guys lived in a world of money. This is what they know. This is what they do. And he reached into their world to use what they know to teach them about the kingdom, which they don't know. Jesus uses both our word talent and their word talent kind of at the same time. So it gets a little bit confusing as we read it, but I think we can do it. I think we can handle it. In that time, a talent was worth 6,000 denarii. And I can see that cleared everything up for you. Crystal clear, I can tell. 1 denarius was average pay for a day of work. So a talent was equivalent to nearly 20 years of work. That's the money that would be saved from 20 years of work. And as a side note, if you have heard this story before, or even in the first time that I read it, maybe you're thinking a talent is like a handful of coins. Like you get 5 coins, and you get 2, and you get 1. That's what I've always kind of had in my mind when I picture this. And I actually looked up paintings and illustrations and things of this parable, and that's what they all had, was little handfuls of coins. But I did research on it, and a talent actually weighed 75 pounds. It is a chunk of gold or silver that has a handle so they can carry it, but it's 75 pounds. And this first servant was given 5 of these. And that was equivalent to 100 years of work. And the second servant was given 2. That would have been equivalent to the pay for 40 years of work. And the third, just 1, the payment for 20 years. So bottom line, even if my math is off, this is a lot of money. This is a lot of money for these guys. I mean, consider what it felt like for them. They're servants. They have never had this amount of money. They probably never seen this amount of money, much less dreamed of having it. They're living day to day. They can't save up, and especially not this amount. How could they ever do that? So given this amount of money, I imagine they're thinking the possibilities are endless. They could go off and make a new life for themselves because the master's going away. Who knows when he'll be back? They could do anything. But what do? The story continues in verse 16. The servant who got 5 talents went quickly to invest the money. Those 5 talents earned 5 more. It was the same with the servant who had 2 talents. That servant invested the money and earned 2 more. But the servant who got 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground. Then he hid his master's money in the hole. After a long time, the master came home. He asked the servants what they did with his money. The servant who got 5 talents brought that amount and 5 more talents to the master. The servant said, "Master, you trusted me to care for 5 talents, so I used them to earn 5 more." The master answered, "Well done. You are a good and faithful servant who can be trusted. You did well with that small amount of money, so I will let you care for much greater things. Come and share my happiness with me." Then the servant who got 2 talents came to the master. The servant said, "Master, you gave me 2 talents to care for, so I used your 2 talents to earn 2 more." The master answered, "Well done. You are a good and faithful servant who can be trusted. You did well with a small amount of money, so I will let you care for much greater things. Come and share my happiness with me." Then the servant who got 1 talent came to the master. The servant said, "Master, I knew you were a very hard man. You harvest what you did not plant. You gather crops where you did not put any seed. So I was afraid. I went and hid your money in the ground. Here is the 1 talent you gave me." The master answered, "You are a bad and lazy servant. You say you knew that I harvest what I do not plant, and that I gather crops where I did not put any seed. So you should have put my money in the bank. Then when I came home, I would get my money back, and I would also get the interest that my money earned." So the master told his other servants, "Take the 1 talent from that servant and give it to the servant who has 10 talents. Everyone who uses what they have will get more. They will have much more than they need. But people who do not use what they have will have everything taken away from them." Then the master said, "Throw that useless servant outside into the darkness, where people will cry and grind their teeth with pain." Now, we've been referring to the story as the parable of the talents. Makes sense why we would. Different translations of the Bible have different headings, so they call it different things. Some of them call it the parable of the 3 servants. Some call it the parable of the wealthy man, the parable of the bags of gold, all of these different things. And they're all the same thing, pretty much. It's the same story. But today, I want us to think of this as a parable of risk. A parable of risk-taking and risk tolerance within the kingdom of God. So let's look at it again. The servants were given the money that the master felt they could handle. He had experience with them. That's how he knew what they could handle. They had proven themselves before, and he knew they could be trusted with that. They had the kind of trust that only comes from experience and relationship. And I think we get this concept. It's kind of how our world works. In your job, if you do something well, your boss, for better or worse, is going to give you more to do. At the gym, if you have been doing a certain number of sets, a certain number of reps, and you've got that down, you're going to do more. In a relationship, if you've been trusted with just a little bit, then they'll know that they can trust you with the deeper parts of their heart. That's how our world works, and we understand that. So I don't want to focus so much on the fact that they received different amounts. I think that's based basically on how long they had been working for the master. I want to focus on what they did with the money that they were given. The first 2 men were bold, and they used what they'd been given in a risky way. They invested it, and it could have gone either way. They could have lost everything, or they were willing to risk that maybe they could gain more. It was a big risk with someone else's money. But the third servant was a little bit different. Soon after we got married, my husband and I started seeing a financial planner. And one of the first things he asked us was, what is your tolerance for risk? And without even hesitating, I looked him dead in the eye and said, I have 0 tolerance for risk. And he was like, okay. Because basically he needed to know, how tolerant would I be of an investment that could fluctuate, an investment that could change, that I could lose, but then I might also gain. And I basically said, nope, no can do, because that makes my brain go into all the worst case scenarios, and that's overwhelming, and I can't do that. But I think the third servant was a little bit like that. I think he's a little bit like me, because I think he was a little bit intimidated. I think he was a little overwhelmed with what he'd been given. He was intimidated by the responsibility. He was intimidated by the instructions he was given. So he played it safe. No risk, no loss. But why was he so cautious? Why is it that he was so cautious? There's got to be some reason. So look again at verse 24. This is the third servant speaking to the master. Master, I knew you were a very hard man. You harvest what you did not plant. You gather crops where you did not put any seed. So I was afraid. I went and hid your money in the ground. Here is the 1 talent you gave me. So why was he so cautious? He was afraid. He was scared. But why was he afraid? Because he believed that the master was a hard, unfair man. But look at this for a minute, though, because there's really no evidence that that's how the master really is. We don't see any other proof that he might be a hard man. The first 2 servants certainly didn't think so. So why might he be afraid to take a risk? Well, I think since it's probably from experience that the first 2 servants got more from the master, I think it's probably from a lack of experience that the third servant got a little bit. I think he was probably the new guy. I think the master did not have much experience with him. He hadn't proven himself, and so the master didn't know if he could trust him with that much. This is the new guy. He doesn't know the boss very well. He's not familiar with the way things work. And because he didn't have much experience, he assumed that the master was a hard, harsh, unfair man. And from that perception, who he believed the master to be, he was afraid. And why was he afraid? Because of what he believed, and that made him unwilling to take a risk. It made him unwilling to really use what he had been given. And this is what I see at work in this man's life, and ultimately in our lives too. A basic principle. How we see God affects how we see our gifts. See, I think from their experience with the master, the first 2 servants were willing to take a risk because they believed that the master was good. But I think that because of a lack of experience with the master, the third servant did not want to take a risk because he believed the master was not good. He was scared. He didn't trust the master's goodness. And we get scared when we start to lose trust and question God's goodness. So my question for you is, are you scared? Are you scared to do something? Do you feel that pull, that nudge within you to do something? Something you know God is asking you to do, but you're scared. If you do, then here's my next question. How do you see God? Do you believe that God is harsh, demanding, easily disappointed? Or do you believe that he's merciful and kind and loving? Because the thing is, fear and love cannot coexist. The book of 1 John says, love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment. And this shows that we have not fully experienced God's perfect love. So see, if you trust the love of God for you, if you trust how much he loves you, then there is no place for you to fear him or the future or any uncertainties coming your way. And I'm preaching to myself. I know there are so many uncertainties. There are so many things that can go wrong. There are so many things that can happen that you have no preparation for. You have no idea they're coming your way. And then to make it even harder, what I've learned is that a lot of times those gifts and those callings that God places on your life, but right up against your greatest weaknesses and insecurities. God called me to speak in front of people when I was struggling with debilitating social anxiety. Why? Why would he do that? Sometimes these talents and these callings can feel like a harsh, cruel joke. Why would you ask me to do this, God? Do you not see what I'm dealing with here? And so it's hard, and it's scary, and it feels like God has missed something, gotten something wrong sometimes. But if we really trust the love of God, if we are really confident in the love that God has for us, if we are confident because we have experienced it in real ways for ourselves, then there should be no risk so scary that we are disobedient to the call of God on our lives. There should be no risk that stops us. Now hear me. I'm a mama. I'm a wife. Those are part of the calling that God has placed on my life. I am not willing to take a risk with the husband or the daughter that God has entrusted to me. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about the talents, the abilities, the things that God has placed within you, that he has entrusted you with to do something with. Do you trust God enough to take a risk with what you've been given? See, we all have different talents. He's put something in all of us. Some people can write, some people can sing, some people do public speaking, some people write poetry, some people can make an amazing garden grow up from a few little seeds, and some people in this church grow some pretty amazing beards too. Just saying. We all have different gifts. Some of us are really good with people. Some of us are better with animals. Some people can really speak in front of large groups of people and are comfortable with that. Some people are better sitting down one-on-one and really seeing a person. Some of us are suited to teach. Some of us are suited to research, so others can teach. We all have a gift. We all have a talent that he has entrusted to us, and he's expecting that we'll use it to produce something more. He's expecting that we won't bury them, we won't hide them, we won't act out of fear. Because that's how the economy of the kingdom of God works. It's built on a high tolerance for risk. It's one that depends on the willingness of the people to step into uncertainty because they are certain of the love of the master. And there's truth in the saying that you've probably heard that our gifts, our talents are God's gifts to us. And what we do with them is our gift back to God. So are you willing to take that risk with your talents? How do you see the God who gave them to you? Because, friends, this kingdom is built on and for and around the greatest risk taker ever. Our master, Jesus, the God of the universe, committed the greatest, most risky move in history. He had all the riches of heaven and put them down and walked away. He existed in safety and comfort and beauty, but wasn't content there and came into danger. He laid down everything because he hoped he could bring back even more. He eagerly risked everything, even himself, for the sake of people who did not even care. This is a God who had everything, but didn't hoard it for himself, took a risk with it, because the one thing he didn't have was the one thing he wanted, and that's us. His love for us was stronger than his fear of risk. The master of this kingdom, the one and only Jesus, is driven to risk because he's driven by love. You could say he's reckless, overwhelmingly extravagant, over the top in his love for us. And I think for him, we're worth the risk. Because the way I think God sees it is that the biggest risk in the kingdom of God is not taking a risk at all. I have a video clip that I think illustrates all of this really well. It's several minutes long, but let's watch this together. I promise there's a point. I didn't just want to watch my favorite show. I promise. There really is a point. See, he was scared. He was nervous. He stepped out of his comfort zone and stood in front of those judges and poured his heart out and was vulnerable. So, what are we doing with the gifts and the talents that God has given us? Because, see, one day we're going to stand in front of the judge too. It won't be Simon Cowell. But we'll stand before the judge, Jesus, and he'll ask us, what have you done with what I've given you? And what will we be able to say? I mean, between now and then, yeah, you'll make mistakes. Pretty sure you'll make mistakes. You'll fall flat on your face. Things won't work out the way that you thought that they would. Maybe you'll feel like you didn't do enough or weren't good enough or were completely out of your element. Or maybe you'll feel like God certainly called the wrong person. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe you'll end up standing and doing something you never, ever thought you would do, trembling and shaking, and your voice is quivering, but you do it anyway. Maybe you're scared. Yeah, it's scary, and it's hard. But maybe if you take that risk, maybe you'll stand before the master, before the judge, and see something that makes it all worth it. I don't know if Jesus gives thumbs up, but maybe he'll give you a thumbs up. Maybe he'll say, good for you. Maybe he'll nod and he'll smile. So maybe the risk is worth it, even for us. Maybe we can be a risk-driven church because we're a love-driven church. Maybe it can be worth it for us too. Take a risk. And then when you stand in front of him and say, this is what I did. I failed. It wasn't perfect. It didn't look the way I wanted it to. But this is what I did. And then he'll look at you. He'll say, well done. Well done. You are good and you're faithful. Well done. And friends, I have to say that as we do this together, as I hope that we will, as we stand in front of God, in front of each other so vulnerably with everything out and exposed for each other to see, I pray that we will cheer each other on. I pray that we'll give each other standing ovations and cheer with all that we've got, because it's scary and it's hard. But you guys, the greatest risk taker in history is cheering us on. He's rooting for us. And truthfully, I think the only way that we can disappoint him is by not doing anything at all.